Jets and Giants have a lot to do this offseason if they want to turn things around for next year. And right now, they're asking themselves, what are our best options? Joining me now is a guy who may have some of the answers, Geoff Magliochetti. Welcome back, my friend.
Mike, thank you for having me. Keep up the great work. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I want to start with the biggest issue for the Jets. Aaron Rodgers is out as quarterback. I personally believe he's the biggest bust in New York sports history. How do the Jets navigate finding a replacement for Rodgers?
A little harsh, but I could see why. But the unfortunate thing about Aaron Rodgers at this point, I disagreed with the Jets' release of Rodgers because, in the grand scheme of things, he was almost the least of New York's problems at this point. Yes, he is not the Aaron Rodgers of the past. Yes, he does carry some sort of significant baggage. But the thing about Rodgers is he was adequate enough. And in this day and age of Jets football, that's pretty much all you need. And releasing Rodgers at this point, that more or less created an issue where there either was none or was fairly minimal. And the Jets are going into a point where the quarterback market is not as deep as you'd like to see it, especially when you're at this point on the franchise timeline. You're too deep in the draft to, go after the top prospects. The free agency market is a little thin. You know that you knew that was going to be the case when Matthew Stafford, a 36-year-old Matthew Stafford, was perhaps the top acquisition, and even that's not happening now that the Rams have agreed to a restructured contract. So, this was an interesting point. I do give credit to Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji going out there and kind of sending a message a little bit. The regime is over. This whole let's try to be the Packers thing. The Aaron Rodgers era is over. It's good to see them kind of admit defeat on that, not live with the mistakes of the past. But if you're the Jets at this point, you need any form of progress. And Aaron Rodgers could have given you that path. Now look, Rodgers is at a point where, that baggage should not be a deterrent to getting him back on the field, because he is at a point where unless he does something truly, truly, truly ridiculous, he's not going to gain or lose fans at this point. The jury is set on Rodgers. The court of public opinion has made its verdict on Rodgers. You either love the guy or you don't like the guy, with no in between. Nothing he can do can change anyone's minds. But all he can do right now is prove himself on the field, continue to work his legacy a little bit. Rodgers out there, again, he wasn't the greatest quarterback. He was nowhere near full strength in New York. But compared to what the Jets have had, this is a team whose best season under center came with Ryan Fitzpatrick in 2015, at least since, of course, the Joe Namath days, maybe the Ken O'Brien days. I'll even throw a few Chad Pennington days in there for you. The best statistical season with this group came with Ryan Fitzpatrick back in 2015. And unfortunately, that says more about the Jets' fortunes than it does the career of Ryan Fitzpatrick. So what the Jets did a little bit was create a need where there was none. Yes, it's probably good for morale. Yes, it's probably good for a franchise timeline. What do they say in every bad relationship? Move on. Don't text them back. Don't give them another call. Don't give them another thought. So it's good from a mental standpoint that the Jets did that, but unfortunately it happened to be the wrong place at the wrong time, in my opinion.
Now, another former Packer who landed with the Jets is wide receiver Davante Adams. The Jets are open to trading him prior to the season and will likely release him if they can't do that. How big of a problem will this be for them down the road?
I mean, when you're the Jets at this point, you're at a point where any setback is going to present a problem. But this is what happens when you go a decade plus in the modern NFL without reaching the playoffs. That's going to happen. Your mistakes are going to be amplified. And the Jets knew that they were in a bit of a pickle with Adams. They knew that they had to win immediately with Adams in the fold, because his contract was structured as such, where it was either you're going to have to win now, you're going to have to restructure it, or you're going to have to release him, because I believe he's due $70 million over the next 2 years on that contract that came over from Las Vegas. But no team is going to trade for that. No team is even going to give up meager assets for that. So it's looking more likely that the Jets are going to have to release him for nothing and eat the dead cap space. So it is going to be a problem for them moving forward. The Jets did set themselves up nicely, and this is like what you were saying, like what made the Rodgers era so disappointing. What was the battle cry throughout the 2023 season? If only they had a quarterback. If only they had someone so averagely adequate. Let's see what happens. The Jets set them up in a very solid place with young talents galore, promising talents, guys who were in high character, guys who had high potential. And unfortunately, that did not come to fruition last season. And it's clear that, Robert Saleh, had run his course. I seen a lot of folks trying to write revisionist history on Robert Saleh after the way things fell apart after he left. Unfortunately, it seemed he was just not. This job was not right for him. Again, wrong place, wrong time. They'd gone as far as they could with Saleh, and it had to happen. Now again, it's time for a new era. It's time for a new regime. And unfortunately, it's going to come with some growing pains in the process, such as eating the financial penalties that the Adams seemingly inevitable release will incur. So, this is going to be a bit of a problem for the Jets. It will sideline them a little bit in the free agency proceedings. Fortunately, there seems to be just enough talent at the top of the receiver depth chart. That, of course, led by Garrett Wilson moving forward. So I think that there's a good chance that they can recover from this. There is the whoever does take center for the Jets next year, does have an immediate weapon to work with, but it does kind of sideline them for sure in the early stages of this latest rebuild phase.
Now, one of the biggest goals for the Giants this offseason, like the Jets, is finding a quarterback. The question is, what's their best approach? Because the draft gets tricky because the two teams picking before the Giants also need a quarterback. So do they trade? Do they find a free agent? What's the best option here?
Personally, I think, and this is going to ruffle some feathers, they should go after Aaron Rodgers, bring him on for maybe a year or two, work with and draft a quarterback. The way I see it, the best thing the Giants could do, it doesn't even have to be Rodgers. Bring in a veteran quarterback, have him mentor a young quarterback, a young guy. And the tragic thing about the Giants at this point is, there are so many holes on this team that the number three pick is not going to solve all of them, at least not immediately. You go draft a quarterback at this point. You basically resign yourself to another rebuilding campaign. You at least have to get into a point where I think we've discussed this before, Mike, especially in terms of the Jets. A realistic goal for each New York team at this point is show up in the hunt column by the end of the year on those playoff charts that they always put up at the end of the year. Those playoff charts says like division leaders, current wild cards, in the hunt. If you're in the hunt column by December, you can consider that a little bit of a successful season at this point. And the Mara family has made it clear that they're tired of losing. They're tired of looking at this. They're tired of being the new Cleveland Browns at this point. You can't endure another three-win season in New York for either side. And it's tough at this point. You can't. We're getting to a point. We're not fully there yet, but we are dangerously close to a point where an entire generation does not know how proud and how dangerous a New York Giants squad can be. The last Super Bowl win looks like further and further a distant memory with each passing year, especially with each passing loss. Not just losses, but embarrassing losses in this process. So I think the Giants' best move would be to go after a veteran like an Aaron Rodgers and have him start for a year and draft a quarterback in the second and third round. There are some decent mid-round talents out there that I believe could make some noise. You got Will Howard out of Ohio State. You got Kyle McCord out of Syracuse. These are guys who can, really benefit from, a quote-unquote redshirt year. The same thing you did with Kurt Warner to Eli Manning in 2004. So I think that this could be the strategy worked once before. It could behoove them to employ this strategy again.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. Now, the NFL Combine took place in Indianapolis last week. College players get invited every year to show off their talent. How much influence does the NFL Combine have in the decisions teams make in the offseason, and how will it affect the decisions of the Jets and Giants specifically?
I think it's very strong because, you are at a point where nothing has, demonstrated the stranglehold that football has on the American imagination more than two things: schedule release day and the NFL Combine. We go crazy to see these guys run around in shorts and t-shirts, run around and, up, raise or lower their draft stock. So it has gotten to a point where, careers can be won or lost over at the Combine. So it's very interesting to see. It's very interesting to see this evolution. And, it really shows the power that the NFL has in the American imagination. So interested to see. And, the Giants and Jets are really going to, put a lot of stock into this. Again, both sides are at points where they can't afford another 3-win season. This is why I've never advocated for the strategy of tanking because, the Jets and Giants, 3-win seasons, 4-win seasons, 5-win seasons, they're becoming mainstays in the top tens of the draft. And, the NFL draft is the biggest crapshoot in the history of mankind. How can you lose games on purpose and leave everything to chance like that? There's good talents out there. The Giants and Jets are at points where, even if you don't make the playoffs, you need to get, 6 or 7 win seasons out there. You need to linger. So they're looking for immediate impact players, and the combine could be a great place to find that. So I think they're really doing their due diligence. They're really going to look for strong athletes in there, and they're going to press forward for guys who can make immediate impacts in their respective new locales.
And finally, Geoff, I want to quickly switch to baseball. This offseason, the New York Yankees reversed a long-implemented rule that didn't allow the players to wear facial hair beyond a well-groomed mustache. The new rule allows them to wear nothing more than a well-groomed beard. Now, the Yankees have always been known for their class and character. Does the team start to lose its identity with a rule like this, or is this a good thing that the Yankees are now getting with the times?
I mean, you could go either way on that, I feel. Personally, I was in the minority on this. I was a fan of the facial hair rule, partially because my high school, my all boys Catholic school, more or less did the same thing. Shout out Don Bosco Prep, go Ironman. But I think that there was a bit of a charm to it in the sense that it was play good baseball, look good doing it. And when you're in a position the Yankees have been in, you kind of do have to shake things up a little bit. There is a point where we Yankee fans are indeed spoiled. We look at seasons that someone in, say, Pittsburgh would give their left arm for, and we view it as a disappointment. You think someone in root for the Miami Marlins, they'd sell their soul for a season like the one the Yankees had last year. And, we're walking around calling it disappointing. We're walking around calling, oh, that was disgusting. Let's never do that again. But we're at a point where, the title drought, again, to talk to the Giants, to bring up like the Giants perspective, it's going to be now 16 years, I believe, since they last triumphed in the World Series back in 2009 against Philadelphia. So I think, you kind of do have to shake things up a little bit. You kind of do. I don't want to say it's incentive, but, it's nice to see that they're kind of, they recognize maybe not a real issue, but they recognize maybe that is keeping them in the past a little bit. And I think it's also a case of self-reflection, too. If you're going to have rules like that, you need to be a perennial contender. You need to be, winning World Series year after year. Because that way, when you do have rules like that, you could say, it's working, isn't it? But the lack of World Series titles shows that maybe it wasn't working. And now that's obviously not the entire. That's not the Yankees weren't losing World Series because Johnny Damon couldn't have a long beard. That's not the case by any stretch of the imagination. That's not the primary culprit. But again, it is kind of a self-reflection at this point, as if to say, like, you can't say it's working, so let's keep it up. It's not working at this point. So again, if they wind up winning it all this year, I wouldn't be surprised to see them come in like ZZ Top in 2026. So I'm eager to see what happens. Frankly, I think the better change for New York, the more impactful change for New York. I'm very glad they're not playing Sinatra after losses anymore. I think that's a step in the right direction. I think so many times last year, for example, I'm like, this team is so not worthy of a Sinatra serenade. And besides, that's life is right there. So I think that's going to be the more impactful change. Eager to see where it leads, though.
That's a fantastic outlook. Geoff Magliochetti, sports guru, thanks as always for all the insight. Head over to ONNJ.com for the latest news and sports anytime. Many Many sports fans recognize the name Dave Portnoy, the social media sensation and founder of Barstool Sports. While sometimes controversial, Portnoy is often hilarious, and his success as a businessman is undeniable. My next guest was so fascinated by Portnoy that he wrote a biography about him called How the Jester Became King, Dave Portnoy and the Unauthorized Real Story of Barstool Sports. The author of that book is Charlie Stanton, and he joins me now. Charlie, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
Well, it's all our pleasure. Let me start by asking, why did you think this was a story that needed to be told, and what makes Portnoy's story so relevant?
I think the biggest thing for me was it's just a great story. Who else has started handing out newspapers alone on the streets of Boston and turned that into a multi-million-dollar media company? So, just from the baseline of it being a great story, I knew it was kind of worth looking into. And then, he's such a popular figure, I figured there would be an audience. And then, just with the Trump era and people just becoming more anti-PC, Portnoy has been like that forever. So all of those things kind of led me to kind of starting this project. And just came out. So very excited about it.
It is very exciting. Now, most of us see Dave Portnoy in videos on social media, but there are always more to people than meets the eye. How deep do you dig into his life and what he was really like off camera?
So I spoke with people at Barstool about Portnoy. I'm not going to really go into what they told me or who said it, just because they are a little intimidated by him. I mean, he's their boss, so I kind of want to protect that. But I kind of learned that he values loyalty. You'll see it in the book, more so than anything, building his company. His guys stay with him. For the most part, people don't really leave Barstool, and that's because Dave is a loyal guy. But he's also, quote unquote, a masshole. You kind of see that in his entertainment. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but he's like that. He's kind of keeps it real, authentic, and people are sort of drawn to that. His employees stick with him for that reason, and also his audience, obviously. Some old interviews of his high school friends said he didn't really stand out in high school, which is kind of funny because obviously he's super famous now. But they kept bringing up the loyalty piece, and just kind of like was always a funny, interesting guy. And he obviously turned that into what it is today. So.
Now, I feel like Portnoy's main demographic, more or less, is elder millennial men, kind of like us. What made Barstool Sports so likable to this group?
He is just not afraid to speak his mind. I think that is sort of what draws that group in. Obviously, they're close to him in age and mostly male, you're right. So that's probably the biggest draw I saw, when researching this book and writing this book. And again, kind of what I touched on before, it's in the same vein as the Trumpian era. People are kind of sick of PC culture. I think, there's a quote in the book from Mike Kearns, who is part of the Chernin Group, who invested in Barstool. And he's just like, look, the world doesn't need another, person in a suit asking an athlete canned questions. People are sort of tired of that. And Portnoy was sort of the new voice that kind of, again, told it how it was. And that kind of was a big draw for people.
Now, a lot of people in New Jersey who are familiar with Portnoy know him from the videos where he goes to a local pizza joint, has a bite of their pizza, and then rates it 1 to 10. I actually think this is how I got to know who he was. How did the pizza videos start?
Cool. Yeah, so it was 2013, him and another personality, Dan Katz, aka Big Cat. If anyone follows Barstool, they know who he is. They started a pizza burrito challenge for their audience. So it was whatever, I think the rules were they each had to eat. Dave ate pizza, Big Cat ate burritos for a week straight. And so I know for a fact that that's when that started. He slowly started reviewing places after that, and it sort of caught on. And it's funny that you brought that up because, when I bring the book around and talk to people about it, people who aren't hardcore Barstool fans mostly know him through the pizza reviews, and that's sort of kind of widened his audience, which is, selfishly good for me because more people know about him. And it is funny too, because when I started this I started working on this in 2021, and he was not, he was kind of like a C- celebrity, and stuff like the pizza reviews, and again, being bombastic online and willing to speak his mind, those things kind of grew his audience. So yeah, that's why we're talking about him right now.
Now, while the pizza brand, the pizza reviews helped his brand, do the pizza businesses generally do well after his visits?
Definitely, absolutely. The lines are usually out the door right after he reviews them. It's actually incredible. And, most places say they can't keep up with demand like right after. So it's definitely a boost. I will say the one critique people kind of have of him is he used to give places lower scores in the beginning when it wasn't as popular, but now he's sort of softened his stance because he knows that so many people are going to be looking at it that he doesn't want to just bash some place. And so it has become a little watered down, but the reaction is incredible. Like, for example, he reviewed a pizza place in New Canaan, Connecticut, where I'm from, and the line was out the door for like the next 3 days. So pretty cool to see.
Are there any pizza places you were tempted to try after Portnoy reviewed it?
Yeah, well, again, Dante's in New Canaan is kind of caught my eye because I'm from there and I had never heard of it. I don't know how, because it's not a huge town. But he chose that place, and then I knew about it and went and tried it. It was good. I think he gave it a pretty good score, something like 7.8 maybe. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of how he's been super helpful with small businesses. You saw it during COVID when he raised millions of dollars for the Barstool Fund, which, is sort of in line with the pizza reviews because, you're helping out a small business. So, yeah.
And Charlie, what's been the feedback on the book so far? Is Dave Portnoy aware that you wrote it?
So he is aware. I reached out to him, obviously, several times, and he just said he didn't want to participate, which is fine. I sort of expected that because, in the book, there are some things that don't paint him in the best light. He's been doing this for 20 years. The internet was a different time back then. So, that was to be expected. But as for the reaction, it's been really, really strong. It's rating really well on Goodreads, which is hard to do because those people take reviews seriously there. So I think it's rating above 4 stars, which is very exciting to see. I wanted to read you just the last review I got real quick, if that's okay. It's like
that's
3 sentences.
More than fine. Go right ahead.
Just to give people some context as to kind of what people are thinking. Justina with a P said, I didn't get to read this one before the book archive, so I borrowed it from a friend who really loves Barstool. This unauthorized account is not glorifying him while also not cruising him. It feels like a genuine account. I found this to be a page turner, well written, and not overtly biased. So that's been the reaction. And it's really, really exciting to see. And it's just going back to what I said before, it's just a great story, like literally handing out newspapers alone in the subway, hawking them on his own, turning it into this popular blog, then selling it to Penn, then buying it back for $1. I mean, it's a generational story. And so yeah, that's kind of what the reaction has been.
I'm glad to hear it's getting great reviews. Now, what's the overall message you hope to convey to the readers who pick up this book?
I would say that authenticity wins. I think that is the biggest theme, whether or not, it turns some people off, which it has. There are a ton of Barstool detractors, people who are kind of against everything Portnoy stands for, but he built this base by staying true to himself. And I think that is the biggest message that the book, conveys.
Yeah, he's real and people can relate to that. Charlie Stanton, author of How the Jester Became King, Dave Portnoy, and the unauthorized real story of Barstool Sports. There it is. Thanks for taking the time. Head over to ONNJ.com for the latest news and sports anytime.